Lightbearer, The Crimson Chronicle, Part 1. Written by J.A. Hawk. Read for you by Joshua Garner. Chapter 4. Dream in Crimson. The night breeze blew softly over rolling hills. The sound of a fire crackled slowly. Fletch scanned the horizon with his back propped against his pack. His vertical pupils were dilated in the dim, reflected light from the fire. Edek had not returned, but there was no cause to worry just yet. But Fletch watched the night all the same. As the fire settled, it issued small pops and hisses, mingled along with the sounds of a soft voice. Fate was sitting with her feet tucked under her, and her paws outstretched over the strange rabbit laid out in front of her. His eyes were tightly closed, and he did not move or stir. Fate drew upon the light and chanted the same words again and again. Almost like a song, they floated on the air, soft and melodic. First, she moved her attention over his head, then down his body, and finally stopped at his ashen paw. It was peaceful here beneath the bright moon. The serenity had done much to assuage the horrors of Wellborough, but Fate let out a long sigh and stopped her technique. She went silent, thinking hard with her paws resting on the chest of the rabbit. All of her efforts at lightcraft technique seemed ineffective against whatever curse afflicted the prince. The sudden quiet made Fletch look at her with calm, calculating eyes. After a moment, Fate reached for her pack. "Fletch," Fate called as she rummaged through her supplies. "Hmm?" He replied, distracted, his gaze now returned to his vigil. "Do you still carry your special medicine?" Fate asked as she pulled out a small bronze bowl from her pack, along with a fistful of herbs. Fletch's head snapped around sharply. "Why?" he asked accusatorily, with a raised eyebrow. "What's your concern with my honey?" "Do you have it or not?" Fate asked weakly. She poured a small amount of water into the bowl as Fletch removed a glass vial from his jacket. Fate extended an expectant paw out. Fletch fingered the small vial hesitantly, then slowly gave it to her. Fate uncorked the vial and poured the honey into the water. "Wait, no, what are you doing?" Fletch protested aghast. Fate ran her delicate finger around the edge of the small glass, emptying every drop of honey into the bowl, then stoppered the vial and placed it on the ground. Fate gave a piteous smile when she saw the crestfallen look on Fletch's face as he stared at the empty little bottle. Gently, she reached out and smudged his upper lip with the tip of her sticky finger. "What I'm doing," Fate said as she sucked her finger clean, "is making sure she nudged the sleeping rabbit, survives the night." She began to crush the herbs and added them to the concoction, one after the other. Fletch slowly licked his nose once, picked up the small vial, and stowed it back in his inner pocket. "Right," he said sourly. Movement in the distance drew the fox's attention. He reached for his sword and got to his feet in a fluid motion. However, it turned out to only be Edek returning from his excursion. The hard scales of his body flashed white in reflected moonlight as he dipped in and out of the shadows of the hills. When he neared, Fate noticed that his gait was odd and his head was held unnaturally high. He had caught a small deer and carried it in his jaws. Edek stopped a few paces away and flopped to the ground. His great chest heaved as he released hold of his catch. Fletch automatically moved towards the kill, taking his small knife from his belt. Edek's head jerked abruptly around as the fox approached, and his jaws snapped shut with a sharp snick. With nostrils dilated violently, one wary eye stared daggers at Fletch. The whisper of a growl issued. "Come off it," Fletch said, somewhat annoyed. He confronted Edek without a trace of fear. Candidly, he jerked his head at Fate, and in a stage whisper added, "Look at her. She's dead on her feet." Edek's great eye shifted from Fletch to linger on Fate, who carefully poured her poultice into Felix's mouth, and rubbed his throat gently to force the rabbit to swallow. Very well, Edek said, shoving the deer towards Fletch with one giant clawed foot, but he looked away bitterly all the same. Don't worry, Fletch said as he stooped towards the deer. We're all making sacrifices tonight. Fletch cut and peeled back the fur along one flank of the deer that had not been savaged by Edek's natural weapons. Then, after a few more well-measured cuts and slices, most of the flank lifted free from the bone. The fox stood and motioned towards the deer with the point of his bloody knife, then turned and went back towards the campfire. Edek grabbed the deer in his jaws and pulled the carcass towards himself. Greedily, he inched a few paces farther away from the fire. Fate had just finished cleaning her paws in the small bowl as Fletch returned. Briefly, he held up his stolen prize so it shone in the firelight. He sat and began to cut the meat into strips, which he then skewered over the fire. I just had a thought, Fletch said sardonically. You know what would go wonderfully with this? Fate closed her eyes and let out a great sigh as Fletch idly elaborated upon the culinary art of glazed venison. Night was nearly over. The fire had burned low into the ruddy glow of embers and ash. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of deep sleep suffused the cool dawn that was fast approaching. Fate was tucked under her blanket, her head laid on her pack. Fletch was curled into a tight ball, the white tip of his tail tucked under his nose. Edek stood sentinel, rigid and unmoving, a statue to welcome the dawn. Felix lay stretched upon his back. The rabbit had remained silent and seemingly unconscious ever since they had made camp. During all of Fate's administrations, he had not moved, but now he suddenly began to thrash and convulse in his sleep. The erratic movement slightly disturbed Fate, who made a groggy noise in her sleep. Edek rushed over and skidded to a stop next to the sleeping group. He towered above them and looked down wildly as he tried to assess the potential threat. His sudden movement is what woke Fate completely. When she turned her head and saw Felix convulsing, she tossed her blanket away and hurried towards the prince in a panic. Felix, Fate called desperately as she resumed her place at his side. Fletch was still asleep, despite the commotion. Edek looked between the pair at a loss, not knowing quite what to do. He compromised by kicking a clawful of dirt at Fletch. The fox grunted in surprise and shook his head, disturbed. As he looked up and upon seeing Felix thrash, he too scrambled over to join Fate. What is this? Fletch asked as he looked Felix up and down. Quickly, he forced a piece of leather between the prince's teeth. Tell me what to do. I think, Fate said, he's having a vision? Her paws glowed softly as she drew upon the light and probed at the prince with tendrils of soft intent. A dream? Fletch asked. No, this is something else. It's much stronger. Fate went slightly as some of the prince's pain filtered across the gap of their connection. Do you think you can scry it? I can try, Fate said, but she looked pointedly at Fletch. If I do, don't let me get lost. Fletch nodded seriously. All right. Fate took a couple of deep breaths, then whispered, Rasta Varun. Her paws gave a surge of light, and then she was no longer herself. Vladimir and Felix walked through the long, meandering gardens of Arbor Keep. They were in the full bloom of spring. It was cool and pleasant, as the great tree shaded them from the midday sun above. Felix chased after his brother, who was swiftly moving away. Vlada, Felix said, catching up to his brother. May we speak? Felix grabbed the sleeve of Vladimir's tunic and forced the older rabbit to come to a reluctant stop. The elder brother looked to the sky, annoyed. In the blue above, a sky rider glinted amidst the clouds, circling in great spirals. The huge bird tucked its wings and plummeted slightly before it caught another updraft, and the wind took the rider far beyond view. obscured by the great green canopy of the tree. "Have you seen father?" Vladimir asked as his gaze returned closer to earth. Felix removed his paw from Vladimir. "No, mother said he was feeling ill again," Felix replied in a small voice. "She was sure spring would chase away his frost fever, but—" There was a long moment as the breeze blew through the gardens, making the flowers dance. "Why?" Vladimir voiced his frustration to the garden. He pulled at the neck of his lace tunic. The question hung heavy in the air. Felix knew what his brother actually meant. "I don't know why they chose me for the Crimson Pact," Felix said. "They say the light might be innate in me." Felix stepped up next to Vladimir and fingered a delicate blossom that grew boldly stretched out across the path. "But my line is already secured with Nona. Plus, we think she might—" Vladimir's voice trailed off, and his features darkened. "This will mean the end of our house, the end of our way of life." He fidgeted more incessantly until he finally broke the tight bond holding the collar and opened his tunic. "Father knows this. He knows what the Lightkeepers demand." Vladimir took a deep breath and turned to Felix. "And you know what happens to Lightbearers." He looked hard at the younger brother. "Landor will end with you." "I didn't choose this." Felix looked down ashamed. "But you didn't make any preparations either," Vladimir said exasperatedly, turning away. "The possibility that it might be you chosen heir. How many times did I try to introduce you to a nice doe, eh? But no, you were always head down, uninterested in the world around you. Well, the world finally found you, and now chaos will follow after." Vladimir started to walk away. Felix stood, thinking hard for a moment before he followed, catching up his older sibling. "Has there been any word from the south?" he asked in an attempt to move the conversation in a different direction. "Uncle sent word a few days ago." Vladimir paused as two doe rabbits in bright spring dresses rounded the corner, arm in arm. Upon seeing the two princes, they dropped into deep curtsies. Their white skirts swept the ground elegantly. Felix and Vladimir both stopped, gently placed paws on their hearts and bowed. Once the two were out of earshot, Vladimir continued. "Skirmishes mostly. He said their captain is devilishly clever. A real thorn in his tail, apparently." "Do you think it'll come to war?" Felix asked earnestly. "I've never known Uncle to back down from a fight, but is there no chance for diplomacy?" Vladimir stopped abruptly, and Felix nearly ran into him, trampling a bed of small flowers instead of hitting his brother. A great turmoil swelled inside Felix, and he felt, or was it someone else who felt? "Diplomacy," Vladimir said thoughtfully. "Perhaps." Felix was still removing himself from the flowers when the sky became awash in turmoil. The bright white clouds turned to dark phantoms. He was her, or she was him? The flowers wilted in a blinding burst of white light. Fate flew through the air and landed hard on her back. A swirl of dust kicked up as her head thumped against the ground painfully. The campfire gave a ferocious hiss as a cup fell and overturned its contents into the flames. Fate slowly lifted herself up on one elbow and looked around in a daze. Fletch was kneeling next to Prince Felix. His arm was outstretched towards her, and she could feel the light receding, which meant he'd been forced to sever her from scrying. The prince stirred feebly next to him. No more than a flicker of eyelids and a pained grimace, but he was no longer thrashing. It was the closest thing to normal signs of life they had seen from him so far, and Fate counted that as a victory. Fate lowered her head back into the dirt and closed her eyes. Her brain felt like it had been pulled from her skull, and it throbbed horribly. She heard Fletch scamper quickly towards her, but she didn't react. This day has sucked, Fate said wearily when she felt Fletch lay a gentle paw on her forehead. Thank you for listening to this audio recording of Lightbearer by J.A. Hawk. If you enjoyed this production, consider supporting the author's work. Your support goes a long way in helping independent artists with projects like this one. Paperback copies of Lightbearer are now available for purchase through Amazon.com. And for readers who prefer a hardback version, they may be purchased through BarnesandNoble.com. Follow the links below or scan the QR code to pick up your copy of Lightbearer today.